Hello, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the Outranking Summit so far. And welcome to this presentation about manual and automated content creation. Before we start, a little bit about myself. My name is Jana Oyen, and I work as an SEO and content manager at SpainHoliday.com. Now, automated content is something that has always fascinated me, and not just because I work with content on a daily basis, but also because before I started working in marketing, I was actually studying to become a linguist. And this topic combines those two elements of my life. Today, we'll try to show you what goes on behind automated content and how it works. And we'll also see some of the advantages and disadvantages of manual and automated content. And in the end, what we'll try to do is we'll try to answer the age-old question, will AI ever replace human writers? So let's dive right in. These articles that you can see on screen, they get popular every couple of years because, well, let's face it, the world is becoming more and more automated. And sometimes we can get concerned. We can wonder, when will my job be next? These articles often mention jobs like factory workers and store clerks, but other jobs mentioned by them are, for example, data analysts, telemarketers, and journalists, and yes, sometimes even a marketing job. And maybe you're like me, who thought, well, yeah, sure, you can automate some of these marketing jobs, but come on, not all of it. Like content writing, for example, no robot can ever produce content at the same quality as a human writer, right? But then in 2019, BERT happened. You probably have heard of it. It's a training tool developed by Google to help computers understand language better. It helps them to understand nuances between queries with the same or similar words, such as a slight difference in preposition usage, or maybe expressions that might change the meaning of the query. And this was done to improve the quality of search results and Google's featured snippets. And Google hasn't stopped at that. Only a couple of months ago, it showed us a preview of their new program called Mng, which is a lot more powerful than BERT. Not only can it understand nuances in text, but it's also able to process a lot of different types of content like images and video. And it can acquire knowledge of the world, which is something that BERT can't do. This makes it able to multitask and also to answer complicated queries very accurately. Now, after reading all of this, you can't help but wonder, if this is where AI is going on Google's side, then what about AI on the SEO side, on our side? A quick internet search shows that there are many content tools out there that already incorporate automation. Either they create all the content through AI, or they use it to assist the software's user. And it's hard not to get nervous, right, when you think about the implications of these programs. Is this where the future of content is going? Will we end up as another one of those bullet points in those articles that we saw earlier? Before we can answer that question, we need to know how automated content creation works. Just like the famous General Sun Tzu has said, before you can win your battle, you need to know your enemy. With that being said, let's take a look at how those automated content creation tools are able to work all their magic. Any automated content creation relies on a combination of two fields, which are computer science and linguistics. When you combine those, you get a process or a system called natural language processing, NLP for short. It uses machine learning and deep learning algorithms to teach a computer program how to understand content, not just the facts, but also nuances within the language. And NLP aims to teach AI to pick up on those very small details. That way it can easily process the data in documents and also other content, and it will be able to use it in different ways, such as, for example, writing that blog article that you want to publish tomorrow. So, simply put, AI content creation converts data into text using NLP. But what goes on between the input and the output? Everything depends on your data. If a content tool accepts structured data with a specific format, like for example, a JSON file, the process is fairly straightforward, and it only requires the AI to be capable of natural language generation, or NLG. But if you can upload your data in any format at all, like for example, a text document, or even an image or a video, the AI needs to be able to understand the input before it can start generating the output. And that's when it uses a combination of natural language understanding, NLU, and NLG. Let's take a closer look at these processes and find out what happens behind that great AI curtain. Natural language understanding. It sounds simple, right? You just need to make sure that the AI can understand what's written. But as you can see from this analysis from a tweet, there is a lot more involved than just understanding the meaning. It needs to know context. For example, what is Facebook? What is message app? What's being referred to? It also needs to be able to identify the tone and the emotion of the text to then be able to pinpoint the intention of the writer. And there are a lot more challenges involved with teaching a computer program how to understand human language, because language can be very ambiguous. For example, we all make spelling and grammar mistakes, and the AI needs to be able to pick up on them before it can understand the language. For example, you are, your. In the context of the tweet, it means your. But not only does a computer need to know that your means your, it also needs to know if the your in this context means your, or if maybe it's used as a replacement for you are. Another difficulty with NLU are synonyms, for example. A computer needs to pick up on these nuances. These three sentences that you can see on screen, in essence, they mean the same, but depending on the word you use, the meaning of the sentence can become softer or harder. A third obstacle for NLU is sarcasm. A computer needs to be able to notice when someone is being sarcastic, when, for example, writing a tweet. Why? Because if it interprets the sarcasm literally, then all the processing that is done with the NLU generated data will be disastrous and will be incorrect. And a last difficulty for NLU are words with multiple meanings. Depending on the context, a lot of words can have one meaning or another, or they can be a verb or a noun. And the computer needs to be able to use that context to interpret the word and figure out the right meaning. So how do you teach a computer to avoid these obstacles and to solve any problems it may find when understanding a text? That's all through trial and error. The most common way of teaching computers NLU is through something called reinforcement learning. This means that you give a state or an input to an AI. In our example, it's a tweet. The AI is then placed in an environment which contains usually different data sets, and it has to use the environment to perform a task. So in this case, understanding a text or some other type of content. After that, its output is evaluated, and if it's correct, the AI will be rewarded. Now, if this sounds familiar, yeah, it does sound a bit like training your dog how to sit or how to stay. The AI has to figure out on its own how they can best meet the output criteria, and the learning involvement will get more and more complex over time until it can perform to the standards set by its programmer. Okay, so now we know how AI can understand content, but how can it use that understanding and then produce a unique and correctly written text all by itself? That's when we turn to natural language generation, or NLG. Natural language generation usually starts from structured data. That data is either provided by you, the user, or it's self-generated using natural language understanding. And then it converts that into readable text. Now, this process is more complicated than NLU, just like we use more parts of our brain to write text than to understand it. And AI will also need to use more processing power, and it will need to go through different stages. An AI, when it generates content, it follows certain basic steps, similar to the ones that we might follow when we are creating content. Simplified, there are three main questions that it needs to answer before it can actually give an output. So why do we need to communicate? What does it need to say? And how should it say it? So first, it needs to figure out what is the goal of the communication? What do you need to achieve? What's the reason? Do you want to request something? Do you want to inform someone or instruct, persuade them? After it's figured out the reason for communication, then it needs to figure out how much should be said, what should be said. So for example, how much detail should they include in the text? Depending on the reason to communicate, there can be more detail or less detail included. Once that has all been figured out, the last step is how should the AI communicate it? How should the text be structured? Where does it introduce paragraph breaks? How should it write the sentences? What words or maybe specific synonyms will it use? What style will the text be written in? A typical process for a simple sentence can look like what you see on the screen right now. Only after the AI has answered these three essential questions, it will produce actual content. And it will start as we said, from the top level and work all the way down, from the reason to communicating to the specific words it will use. It will consider everything very carefully. Now, because NLG is more sophisticated, the process of teaching it to an AI is also a lot more complicated. You have different training texts and data sets. Grammar needs to be taught, syntax needs to be taught, semantics need to be taught. And that's why in a lot of cases, NLG software actually uses templates that the AI fills in with sentences that it generates. This approach allows you for more control of the generated text, especially because you can also set rules that the AI has to follow when it's writing. However, technology is always evolving and always improving. And in the NLG world, developers are introducing more complicated models. One to keep an eye on is neural networks. This is a software that simulates a biological neural network, just like the ones we have in our brains. And it aims to teach an AI to make decisions on its own, instead of depending on those templates and those rules. Okay, so now we understand our enemy. We know how they work. But according to Sun Tzu's quote, we also need to know ourselves. Where do we stand compared to an AI writer? Well, let's have a look at some of our strengths and weaknesses compared to AI. There are two main advantages to using an AI for content writing. And coincidentally, they are also the things that most businesses zone in on immediately: time and money. When you look only at the time it takes to an AI to generate text, it can do it a lot faster than a human writer. And if you can get things done in a fraction of the time it used to take, naturally you'll also save a lot of money. And usually an AI software is cheaper than paying a freelancer or hiring a writer to write your content. What's the score? AI 2, human 0. But what about text quality? That's where us humans shine. Although AI can generate quality short texts, even content by the most sophisticated software that exists today still needs to be checked by a human. because it's not yet at a level where it can operate 100% independently, especially not commercially. And this is especially true for those of us who work in international environments. Most AIs are trained in the most widely spread languages, like English. But if you need a text in a language that has a smaller user base or a smaller amount of native speakers, you'll often find that the text will need a lot of corrections, or it even needs to be partially rewritten. So looking at it like that, that time-saving aspect of AI is actually not true in some cases. The score, AI 2, humans 1. Another related advantage to the previous point that us humans have is long-form content. So we've seen that AI-generated content usually still needs to be checked by a human. Well, the longer the content that it is that an AI has to generate, the harder it will be for the program and the more mistakes it will make. Yes, it's true that AI has a workaround for this problem, as we've seen before, those templates that we've mentioned. But on the other hand, they can also work constricting and be an extra obstacle. And a human writer doesn't have these same limitations. Humans and AIs are now tied. So what's going to be our tiebreaker? As cliche as it sounds, our last advantage over bots is the human touch. A lot of times, automatically generated content has actually an artificial feel to it, and readers notice it. So unless a human proofreads the text and maybe makes some small tweaks here and there, the readers will always notice that something is off. So it looks like we have the edge on machines when it comes to content writing, right? But does this mean that we can pass off automated content creation as just a trend? Not quite. While AI may not just be ready yet to take over the world, as we can see here, the advantage of machine learning is that it will always keep evolving, it will keep growing, and well, it will keep learning. In general, the AI industry is projected to grow at a rapid pace. For example, in only 2 years, the percentage of marketeers that use some kind of platform with AI assistance or completely AI-based has grown from 28 to 84%. And yes, that includes content writing. Now, there are some great content tools that offer the help of an AI to their users with minor content tasks. Provided with enough data, some AI can even write high quality short texts. So it's only a matter of time until AI gets to the point where it can write better and longer content. Maybe not within 5 years, like one of those headlines at the start of the presentation said, but slowly but surely, it will get there. So what are we supposed to do then? Should we just give up? As the saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them. Instead of being concerned about automated content creation, embrace it. Try some AI content tools that can help you with more boring tasks, like, for example, checking for plagiarism, or maybe paraphrasing or summarizing text, and even writing short answers to questions. That way, you can spend your time on more complicated text, like, for example, writing your very amazing and complicated tutorial, or developing your content strategy to capture more leads, or maybe optimize your already existing content for more conversions. As we come to the end of this presentation, I'd like you to remember these 3 points. AI-generated content can be good and actually helpful, especially in 2 cases: when the content is short, less allowance for mistakes, and when you have a lot of data for the AI to base the content on. The more data you give it, the better its output will be. The second point, automated content creation will always need a human touch, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. At the very least, it will need some tweaks to take away that artificialness that the text has, or it will even need a complete proofread or some rewriting. And lastly, will we ever be able to remove humans from the content creation process? It's not very likely, and especially not for the near future. As the previous point already iterates, humans are still needed, but AI can be a great help. And that is why going forward, we should actually find a way to coexist, taking advantage of that AI generated content wherever we can, so we can save time with the small tasks and focus on the bigger fish ourselves. If you would like to know more about automated content creation and NLP, I recommend that you check out these two sites, towardsdatascience.com and devopedia.org. They have some great articles and also refer to interesting studies within those articles. You can also download this presentation on SlideShare if you would like to have another look later. And of course, stay in touch with me. I'd love to hear your take on automated content creation and also your theories on how and when AI eventually will take over the world. Thank you very much.